Good evening to all. This week's Parsha is Parashat Ki Tavo. It has within it again a continuation of the mitzvot hatluyot ba'aretz, as well as a content which is directed at people who are about to begin their new lives in a new Jewish state. And as they are about to enter, they are going to give their bracha and Har Grizim and Har Ival in surrounding the city of Shechem. 6 tribes will give the bracha, and 6 tribes will utter the klala. The bracha is not intended to be upon them necessarily, but upon they utter it in honor of Klal Yisrael. And certainly the klala is not intended to be invoked against the people who are uttering the klala, but rather they are merely stating what can happen when people fail to live up to their individual and as their national obligations. Bravanel, in his parish on this parsha, says that really these sets of brachot actually are part of what constitutes the brachot and klalot, constitute what will constitute the civilized nation, and therefore they get a great deal of play in the Torah itself. We're going to focus on the last of these klalot that are mentioned in Perek Kav Zayin, Pasuk Chavav, chapter 27, verse 26. After the statements are made about the brachot and the klalot, the last of these utterances is as follows. Arur asher lo yakim et divrei haTorah hazot. Cursed will be the one who does not uphold these mitzvot, the words of the Torah, la'asot otam, that he should do them. The Amar kol ha'am, and the people then are entreated to say Amen. In other words, a verification that indeed that klala, along with the other klalot, God forbid if they come about, indeed are to be sanctioned. Now, we're going tonight to discuss various views of this last bracha itself. The bracha seems to be somewhat of an all-encompassing bracha. That's what Rashi says. Rashi says on the pasuk, Asher lo yakim, Arur, cursed is the one who will not uphold. Yakim means to uphold. Kum is to stand up. The kayem is to fulfill, like kiyum mitzvot. But yakim is in the hifil form. It is causative, forceful, and it says, cursed are those who will not uphold the words of the Torah. Rashi says, Kan kalal et kol Torah kula. Here, according to Rashi, the curse is upon people who choose not to uphold the whole Torah. We're going to see what that means. Chazal tell us it doesn't mean, as the Ramban will say and others, that you just didn't inadvertently do a bracha, or you didn't. It actually even mentions sukkah. You don't build a sukkah. No, it's not referring to that. We'll see that it means people who do not accept the validity of the Torah in its entirety. That's what Rashi says. The kiblua alehem ba'Allah uvishvua. And it is that those people must accept the Torah in its entirety. So first, let's take a look and see what the Ramban says about this last of the klalot, which is mentioned. And again, you can see that, by the way, the earlier klalot all deal with individual averot that people may do. For example, arur mate mishpat ger yatom va'almana. Cursed be the person who perverts justice from a ger, a person who comes to Judaism and himself has no family to back him up. He has no support system. He comes on his own out of the love of the Jewish people, the love of God, but he has no support system, no family. Okay? Yatom, of course, is also one who is deprived of a major part of his support system, meaning to say usually it's a father who has passed away, and poverty then ensues. The almanah, the widow, these are all people who cannot fend for themselves, as we oftentimes find in a general situation. And so therefore, a person who makes their difficult life even more difficult, that person is. So, but it's specific there. What we're going to focus on tonight is Pasuk Kavav in chapter 27, verse 26. Cursed is the one who will not uphold that. And now we're going to talk about what does it mean not to uphold. So the Ramban says to us as follows. Lefidati, first he cites Rashi, as he often does, and the Ramban, because he lived after Rashi, was born well after Rashi passed away, almost a century after Rashi passed away, but he did have the privilege of seeing Rashi's, the transcripts of Rashi's writings, and he oftentimes found them to be unacceptable to him, obviously respectfully, but he always quoted them. And we should point out the reason he quotes them is because, remember, we're talking 400 years or 300 years, 300 to 400 years prior to Gutenberg, to the printing press. That means every single word that Rashi wrote and the Ramban, still well before the printing press, they all were dependent upon the faithfulness of the scribe to write what was written, to write and to produce the actual words of the Ramban. And so one thing is, we do have different, of course, girsaot. We have different versions and formulations of what Rashi said in the Ramban. So that's one reason he quotes, because he knows you and I may not have the same version that he has. So, he says, here's where I'm going to disagree. And he tells you, he quotes his manuscript of Rashi. Most of the time it's quite faithful. Most of the time it really is there, but there are changes. Sometimes there are variations, but those variations don't make a difference. Yeled instead of nar is not necessarily going to be a difference. But he says, the Ramban here, after quoting Rashi, Ki hakabbalah zot sheyodeh b'mitzvot b'libo. It is an internal acceptance of the authority of the Torah. That's what the Ramban says. The Yubeinov emet v'yamin she'oseotam yelo sachar v'tova. And he believes, says the Ramban, such a person, it's an obligation of every person to accept all of the words of the Torah, and that he will perform them to the best of his ability. And he believes that if he performs these mitzvot, he will get reward. Reward and punishment is one of the 13 principles of faith that the Rambam mentions, and that in itself is accepted by virtually everybody. And a person who violates these rules will be punished. But he says, the fact that you don't necessarily do one of the mitzvot does not mean that you are subject to the curse. We will now see who is, according to him. If, though, he will reject or deny even one of the mitzvot, not that he doesn't do it. We all, if that's the case, as Chazal say, that the Jewish people could not survive, but he doesn't accept it. Otia beina b'teila lo'olam, or he would say that this mitzvah once was here and will never come back. Inehu arur. That person is the object of the curse. Avalim over alachat mehem, but let's say he doesn't make a bracha, or he missed kiyat shofar. Of course, that's a terrible thing, but that's not what brings him to the curse. Kagon, listen to this. Kagon she'achal chazir. Say he ate food which is prohibited. V'hasheketz l'tavato, and he ate it because he couldn't get past that. McDonald's looked so good, and he went and he bought it. That person does not come under the rubric of the curse. That's, the Ramban says, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about someone who says there was once a prohibition of chazir, of eating pork. Now there is not. Oh, well, now there is not. That puts him under the curse. Oshalo asa, sukkah, lulav, any of these things that he didn't do. Einenu b'cheirim. He is not under that proscription. He lo amar katuv. Now, why? Why does he say that? Why does he say? He says, because if you look carefully at the pasuk, it says, cursed is the person who does not uphold the Torah, this Torah, to do it. In other words, there's two things. If he violates one of the mitzvot and he eats something which he shouldn't eat, that doesn't mean he doesn't realize that, or he doesn't affirm the fact that eating treif is wrong. That's not it. So therefore, he doesn't come under the curse. Of course, he's subject to punishment, but not the curse of being proscribed from the Jewish people. And therefore, he says, Ella Omar Asher Lo Yakim. It says he does not uphold the words of the Torah, la'asot, in order not to do them. And therefore, he says, Katan Kimu v'Kiblu. He says it's the same meaning of the word Kimu v'Kiblu that we have in the Megillah, that the Jews accepted. All right, remember, one of the reasons that Purim is considered such a powerful holiday is because after they were saved in this miraculous yet unseen way, they realized, Kimo v'Kiblu. They went back and reaffirmed and reaffirmed for not just intellectually, but to do. And therefore, that's why Purim is so important. So therefore, if a person, that's basically what the Ramban says. Now, we're going to take a look and see what the Torah Tamima brings for us. Now, the Torah Tamima was compiled by Rabbi Halevi Epstein, who was a nephew. He was the son of Rabbi Yechiel Michal Epstein, who was the writer or the compiler of the Aruch HaShulchan, one of the primary texts that we use to determine Jewish law, and that was his father. And he was the nephew of the Netziv, very great Netziv, the Rosh Hashiva of Volozhin. So he wrote a groundbreaking sefer in the latter part, in the early part of the 20th century. And in it, what he did was he called it Torah Tamima. The Torah Tamima, I'm going to show you the text itself. You can see that it actually is divided into three parts. First part, as always, is the Chumash with Onkelos, Rashi. The second part, though, are parts of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, of the oral law. whether it's Midrash or whether it's the Talmud, the middle part here. The bottom part is his interpretation of these selections. Now they are selections. In other words, not everywhere that the Talmud writes about this pasuk may or may not be found on this page, but very often, most if not all of those comments of the Talmud Yerushalmi, Talmud Bavli, or again the Midrashim, very often you will have 6 or 7 citations by the Torah Tamima, by Rabbi Baruch Halevi Epstein, but he only cites them when he has something to say about it. And so he has here what he wants to say. First, what does he do? First, this is a Gemara Yerushalmi Sota. The Gemara says, Asher lo yakim, cursed is the one who will not uphold this. V'chiyesh Torah nofelet. The Gemara there, it says, asks rhetorically, what? Are we talking about a Torah that has fallen, that he won't uphold it? Shimon ben Yakim Omer, Zeh HaChazan, who is it referring to? Not a Torah itself, a Chazan, Shehu Omeid. Let's talk about a Chazan that he himself does. He's the Chazan here doesn't mean necessarily like a cantor, but it's someone who is honored to discharge some service in the Beit HaMikdash or in the Beit Knesset. So he says, Yesh Meforshim Dekoi ala Magbia Sefer Torah Lachar Kriya. In other words, we know that in both Ashkenazic and Sephardic congregations, part of the Torah that the Torah reading is the lifting of the Torah. Some minhagim are to lift it at the very outset. Some of when it's taken out. Some are to lift the Torah so all can see it at the end of the reading. And of course, that's where we say the Zota Torah Shesam Moshe. This is the very Torah, word for word, letter for letter, that was given to Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai. So therefore, a person who does not discharge his duty properly so that everybody can see the Torah, so that's what it's talking about here. Arur asher lo yakim. Cursed is the person who deliberately doesn't follow through with this. Not that he can't. He can't, that's something else. Then perhaps it should be given to someone else. But it's not, it's where he just does not bother. So he says, this is, others say, this is the Chazan, the person who is given the honor of the Torah in the synagogue. She'eno mekim sifrei Torah ba'aron hakodesh. Lying them down on their side. They have to be kept propped up, okay? And in a way that they will not fall. So if a person is negligent in how he puts the Torah back, so he's going to get a curse. That's what the Gemara says there. The Gam Yesh Lefarish, some other people say this, and this is interesting and certainly has application for Jewish educators, as we will see. Another view is that this refers to the Dekoi al Melamde Tinokot. It's referring to people who teach children Torah, and that person is called a chazan. You notice chazan, it really comes from the Hebrew shorish chazol, to see, a visionary. So ideally, well, every teacher like to think that she or he is a visionary, but it means to say one who always has their sights properly set on the child that they are teaching. So a chazan nowadays, it just usually means the person who leads the davening, and shliach tzibur, but it could have multiple applications. And why is he called a chazan? Because he oversees the welfare, not the intellectual welfare of the children, so that they in fact do learn the Torah that he's teaching well. Okay, so this, and also he looks to make sure that there are not mistakes. Very important. So one of the things that oftentimes we as teachers I know I can speak for myself, we let things slide with children, not because we're negligent. But if you see a child's not reading well, so they read the words improperly. So the truth is they should really be corrected at the appropriate time. It's not to be, corrected at a time that would embarrass the child, but they should be corrected. And oftentimes we get students, high school, and then it goes on in the yeshivot, that they still don't read properly. And so one of the important things we have to remember, I don't mean to say that this pasuk therefore means that if you don't correct the child, you're cursed, but it does mean that we should take it very, very seriously, not to allow mistakes to slide. One of the things that I point out often is I hear very good davening from many, many students, but once in a while I'll hear a mistake in davening when the person is in fact a chazan or a shliach tzibur. So I will try either as an individual later to tell him that this was read improperly, or for example, one of the things I do in my with my older classes is when I get them and say, okay, not today I heard a mistake, that will point out the person who made a mistake, but it's a common mistake. People make a mistake, instead of saying hodo al eretz, they say hodu al eretz. It's different. And I tell them, you're not going to lose olam haba because of this. But we're very careful to do things right. If it's in sports, we want to do it right. If it's an accounting class, we want to do things right. Al achat kama v'chama, how much more so we, just on principle, say the davening properly. Again, a person who davens with all his heart or with all her heart, if they make a mistake in the reading, guaranteed they're not going to lose olam haba. But nevertheless, we want to make sure that we do it. So that's what the Gemara says. It's referring to people like that who either have the honor of lifting the Torah, placing it back in the Aron Kodesh, or teachers who are charged with the welfare of their students' growth. Now we'll move to a couple of other interesting interpretations. The Tavo of the Kabbalah, Rav Yaakov Mecklenburg, who was Rav Yaakov Tzil Mecklenburg, who was lived in the 19th century, was a contemporary of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, and he, like many people in the 19th century, there was a certain renaissance the Hebrew language, and that the Haskalah was a part of it. Again, not everything they did was wrong. And Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi Mecklenburg, although not a part of the Haskalah per se, was a very enlightened person. He knew about many things, as did Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, and they knew Hebrew very, very well. Now he wrote a sefer called HaKetav VaHaKabbalah, right? That the written and the Kabbalah, mean to say the Torah Shebechtav and the Torah Shebal Peh. He was a precursor to what Rabbi Baruch HaLevi Epstein did. He put the Torah Shebechtav and the Torah Shebal Peh on the same page, so that you could see the intertwining of these two and how the written Torah is incomplete without the Masorah, without the tradition that goes with it. Now, Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi Mecklenburg wrote here the following on this pasuk: "Cursed is the one who does not uphold the Torah to do." He says, there are, and I'm quoting in English what he writes. He wrote in Hebrew, of course. There are a number of people who portray themselves as to the general population as pious, and that they do mitzvah and study Torah. But in reality, he says, their intention is not to study or to perform for the sake of Torah, but they do it because there's a certain prestige in their community to do it, or they get a certain. And therefore, he says that's their primary intention. And he wants it so that other people will consider them as Torah scholars or people who are pious. And then what happens with these people? They become appointed to key positions in the community, involved with lots of money. And in those days, of course, one of the major objectives in the 19th century, one of the major objectives of Jewish organizations was to look out for the welfare of the disadvantaged, Yutomim, people who were orphaned. There were lots of orphans in those days. Many people died very young, and they left families. He says, Yaakov Tzvi Mecklenburg says, "Ve'elu hein be'emet hachanefim asher lo yir'u el pnei hashchina." These are the very people who are people who put on a show in order to curry favor from high places, so that they will be able to get positions of authority. And so he says, the Gemara says that among the people that can't do tshuva, or almost can't do tshuva, are the chanefim, people who maneuver themselves into positions by making themselves look far, far more pious than they are. And so therefore, this is the people that he's talking about. Those people, said Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi Mecklenburg, those are the people that are cursed, right? Because what do? They show themselves to they really don't care about the Torah itself, but the Torah becomes a means by which they can get authority, popularity, or whatever it is that they're looking for. Those people, he says. Now, Bravanel takes a little bit of a different approach. He also chastises the people who are doing wrong, especially in the public sphere. But he says that this pasuk, which of course Moshe Rabbeinu presented with HaKadosh Baruch Hu's approval, says, Re'eh, he says, all of these curses are because of elements of wrongdoing that affect the entire Jewish people. And he says, Re'eh, you should see that here is another cause of evil that comes to us, or bad, harshness that comes to us. And it could come in the form of course, the tochacha. So he says, these are, number one, are people who are apikorsim. Once again, people, said Abravanel, who reject their apikorsim. They say, oh, these mitzvot you don't have to do. This wasn't given by God. And of course, nowadays we live where the majority of the Jewish people, certainly in America, are being taught by people who themselves reject the divinity of the Torah. And this mitzvah or this curse, so to speak, affects exactly that. The very people who are apikorsim, people who say that that the Torah was written by human beings, that it's selected statements by people, and that is actually comes under this severe curse, which the Torah says, which ultimately leads to the tochacha. And he says, Abravanel mentions them, apikorsim, in the time of the Bayit Sheni, the second Beit HaMikdash, but then he says, he throws into it what he calls the people that the karoyim who themselves reject Torah Shebaal. They accept the Torah Shebachtav in its entirety. They reject the Masorah of the Jewish people. He says those people fall under that curse, and so that's actually the Stukim in particular, not just the Karoyim, which came later, but the Stukim in the time, very end of the Beit HaMikdash, the Stukim who base their entire religious practice and philosophy on the Torah Shebachtav and the literal meaning of the Torah Shebachtav. When we say the literal meaning, so it means they reject the Masoret of the Talmud. Therefore, he says those people fall under that curse. And he says that he also says it comes under the reason the Torah used the word yakim is because it's the very same concept of kimu v'kiblu. They accepted. It's not so much what you do. We all fail. Everybody fails. With some people, it's in dietary laws. With other people, it might be in lashon hara. We all fail. That is not where the curse lies. All the Meforshim agree. It lies with people who reject the authenticity or the divinity of the Torah. Okay, and therefore that's why he says, and the Ramban says the same. That's why it says asher lo yakim la'asot. Means to say, when I accept it with the intention of performing the mitzvah. I may fail, and that's forgivable. That's why we have tshuva. That's why we have Yom Kippur. That's why we have Rosh Hashanah and Elul, which is and I'm sorry, the last days of Elul, or for Sephardim, of course, the entire month of Elul. That is so that we should improve upon ourselves. But if we don't accept the mitzvot, all right, if we say these are not a part and parcel of the Jewish people, so then of course that in itself is something that's very, very difficult to do true. So this is and we'll conclude. We'll take a minute to conclude. Rabbi Menachem B. Sachs, who was one of the prime movers of Jewish education and the Jewish people in Chicago, and he, of course, was a man who he was the Ish Tzibor. He was a man who understood the organizational necessity of a tzibor. And so he, of course, was one involved in the founding of the Associated Talmud Torahs of Chicago, which is one of the premier educational organizations in the world. And of course, he was superintendent of schools, and Rabbi Dr. Harvey Well, Shlita, he later followed up, and now we have two wonderful. It's a joint superintendency that we have now, following the tradition and allowing for differences between the various different Orthodox movements. But the Tzada Shava Shava, the commonality is everybody, every school believes in the divinity of the Torah, both the Torah Shebachtav and the Torah Shebal. But I'll conclude with Rabbi Sachs. Rabbi Sachs said, here's the problem. He says, who really falls under this curse? He says, it can be the organizations that put on their priority scale education last. We have to take care of course, you have to take care of the elderly. You have to take care of the sick. You have to take care of any number of organizations. Absolutely, that's for sure. But very often, the major Jewish organizations here, even in Eretz Yisrael, oftentimes allow the learning of Torah and the practice of Torah to be left to a very, very small budget. And so Rabbi Sachs spent a good part of his life and time cultivating a relationship with the Federation of Chicago. And to this day, the Federation of Chicago, Jewish Federation, is one of the prime, we would have to say, supporters of Jewish education. Among all of the other federations in the country, Chicago is known that our schools are the recipients of relatively large portions of Jewish money dedicated to Jewish education. That's the future of our people. And of course, that education in both the Torah Shebachtav and the Torah Shebal Peh, the written and oral law, that really is the lifeblood of the Jewish people. So I want to wish everybody a good Shabbos, and hopefully may this year that we're about to embark on, not too far away, be a year in which we see that we are mekimim et Torah. We uphold the Torah and mitzvot, both on an individual level and on an organizational level. Shabbat shalom.
Good Shabbos, Michael.
Shabbos, everyone. Shabbat
Thank you,
shalom.
Rabbi
Thank
Myers.
you.
My pleasure.
Good Shabbos.
Thank you
Enjoyed
for
every
tuning
minute.
in. Thank you for tuning in.